Over to you, Sam.
Thank you. I just realised I'm on the wrong slide, so that's a good start. So as I say, today I kind of plan to provide some benefits of having a PMO function and advice on how to make a PMO function successful, because I think a lot of the questions that came through before and a lot of conversations I've had with people through the mentoring program and in other forums are around how do I stop the PMO function being seen as just a necessary evil or a governing police force that people despise. So we'll hopefully cover some of that as we go through the course. And okay, so why do we say that we have a PMO function? A PMO function oversees all of the project management activities for an organization, typically covering all of its tools, people, and project management aspects. It sets the standards, provides governance, and if done properly, can improve the quality through efficient management of time, money, and resources, which helps the desired outcomes be met in a more efficient way. Without it, I think it's better to look at why we have a PMO function by looking at the opposite. If we didn't have a PMO function, we'd probably likely to see multiple project management styles, depending on people's background, whether that be Prince 2 versus PMP, Agile versus Waterfall, just different historical styles that people have. So you'll see a lot of different approaches to project management and different styles in their reporting, in their recognition of what's red, amber, green, etc. So not having a PMO function can lead to a lot of different confusing approaches to project management. You'll also see a lack of transparency into the status, probably not having a tight reporting function, and projects not delivering to the strategic goals, and work being done that's maybe not necessary to the strategic goals. Might be a fantastic piece of work, excellent output, but not actually what you're looking as an organization to deliver. And without the PMO function there to govern that, this happens quite a lot. Potentially, you'll be seeing a lot of budget overruns, over or underutilized resources because ineffective planning is being done and not enough time is being done given to thought around the planning. So all of those things you may be familiar with, you may have seen, you may be seeing right now in roles that you're doing, and a PMO function can help to address. So further on, benefits of having a PMO function, and these are just some of the benefits that we see for a good PMO function, but a consistent approach to project management tooling, methods, practices, templates, and documentation. So the tools, when people talk about tools, I think they get a little bit concerned when we look at PMOs and tooling and think we have to go out and buy some big fancy, off-the-shelf tooling that does everything. Not necessary. Tools may just be, an Excel spreadsheet, a PowerPoint presentation, template for reporting. Now, they can be simple, or you can invest if the organization you have has the money and the desire to do so into some of the tools that are on the market. But don't think too much about these being big tools. They could be anything. But I guess the main thing is that we have consistent tools. We have a consistent set that are efficient and meet the needs of everyone involved. A transparent reporting of status and financials to all stakeholders. So again, going back to my point of the negatives that you may be seeing now, by putting this together, there's going to be a consistent set of records, one set of numbers, statuses that go through in a consistent manner. Improved stakeholder satisfaction, I think, is one really key, because some of the questions that came through, as I said at the beginning, were about how do I win over the stakeholders? How do I get people to see that I know there's a need for a PMO function, but how do I convince others? And I think this is about spending time understanding what the problems are in your organization. And we'll come on to this a bit more in a further slide, but making sure that they're engaged, making sure that they don't just see this as a tick box exercise. I must give you a status report every month. I must do this. If they see where it's being used and how it's being used and how it benefits them, they're more likely to partner with you and come on this journey with you. And that will really improve the chances of success for the PMO function. Increased productivity. So this can be achieved by efficient resource planning. You may be able to do more work than you originally thought because you planned this out properly. People are being utilized at the right time in the right ways. In some organisations, in some cases, it may be that you're looking to make reductions in cost, and therefore you don't need as many resources as you originally thought. Reduce risk, another big one at the moment with everything that we're going through in the world, but companies are looking at how can they mitigate risk, and I think learning that they don't need to have huge projects and programs to go through. And if you look at the working from home that a number of people are doing now, companies have been wanting to do that for years, and it's taken many meetings, various different people involved, and a lot of roadblocks preventing them from doing it. And yet in COVID-19 world, they managed to sort of like man that and do that in a week. So having a strong governance program means that the risk can be reduced, because you're kind of preventing the issues that are coming up, and you're foreseeing them further enough down the road that you can address them before they become real issues. Long-term financial efficiency, obviously, again, if you're planning your resources properly, if you're managing your budgets, if you're setting strict tolerances to the overruns and managing those and preventing those, there's going to be more financial efficiency for you to do projects, achieve more, etc. So let me just jump across to the next slide. So I added this slide in after talking with Elaine, and I think this is important, that when people are asking, how do I create a PMO function, or what is a PMO function? I think the first sentence that I've got on there, no two PMO functions are ever the same. I've worked in a number of organizations. I've talked to a lot of people at conferences and networks, and hired PMOs in. No one ever does the same role. There's a lot of commonalities between PMO, but depending on the organization, the maturity of your project management function, PMOs are going to be different. I think what is, and I'm just going to kill the group chat here just so I can read the words out of the bottom there, but there will be aspects that are the same, and it's up to you at the beginning to, as I said, understand what's the main issues, what's the main reasons for why you need a PMO function. And as part of the mentoring function, I'm happy to talk to people offline about their individual needs. There's some exercises you can do to work through to understand, where you are currently, how mature your environment is, and where you want to be, and what your priorities should be. But there will be functional, whether or not you're just designing and setting standards, providing governance to those standards, and driving efficient delivery. There's aspects that will be structural, so you may be managing the people. The project managers may roll up to the PMO function in some organizations. Designing processes, looking at the tooling that's available and bringing tooling in. Disciplinary in terms of execution, driving the change, managing the actual resources, doing the communications. But I would imagine that most would see the bottom one. It'll be a mixture of all three of these. It'll be parts of that, and a whole bunch of other stuff bolted on. In all of the PMO functions I've done, the PMO function is the first group that will be thought of when there's some work required that everyone else is saying they're too busy to do. It will be, oh, maybe the PMO team could do that. So it evolves and becomes unique to that organization, to that point of time. But there's definitely some commonalities that can be seen through there. And as I say, understanding your organization's priorities and issues, and then trying to influence how you shape the PMO to address those is really important. For example, and I've got a couple of examples here from recent points in time. So in 2010, when I set up a PMO function for a large technology group, I would say they were very immature. A new CIO came in. He wanted, not unrealistically, to have a monthly review of all of the projects and the statuses. And I think at the time the portfolio had 112 projects. Like I say, not unrealistic, but it wasn't available at the time. Everybody had their own thoughts. Everybody had documentation they were providing to their clients, but it was all in varying formats. It couldn't be produced quickly. It couldn't be turned around. It was literally taking all month to extract the information from people, put it into the right format that the CIO wanted. It was very much a stickler on the format he wanted, and the information he wanted, it couldn't be pulled from the system. So it's a very manual process that we had to go away, design a process, manage with the stakeholders, get them to buy in to the fact that if we did this once and pulled it in, it saved them time. They didn't have to go and input it into 2 or 3 systems, and we built that up. And that was the very immature start off for a PMO function. That evolved. So then, after we'd set the standards for the reporting, the timings, automated some of the inputs, managed to win people over, found out how we could review 112 projects in a 1-hour meeting, by prioritizing and giving everyone enough airtime where necessary, rotating, etc. It then evolved to, okay, we needed to have RAID control, change control, reviews with the clients. And over time, that process started to mature to where in 2018, that same PMO function kind of expanded out across more groups. At one point, it was just one point of technology. Then we ended up doing for the whole of technology. And the focus was much different then. It became much more mature. We had a machine. It was constantly being evolved, but it worked. The focus then became more on people management, resource planning, location strategies, financials. It was the same people working in the PMO function with me, but their maturity had grown, the organization's maturity had grown, that they could be left alone to do reporting and change reviews on their own and report what was required to us for us to understand where they were, that it was happening, and correctly we were governing that, but not as hands-on. So we had more time to then look at the strategy of the organization and work out how we could be more efficient with our money, and by using a better location strategy, have more resources for less money, etc. So two different ends of the scale there, in terms of responsibilities, but the same group, and just showing how it can progress over time. So we've talked about the benefits and what a PMO function is. I kind of now wanted to talk about how to set up a PMO function, and we've touched on bits of this as we've gone through the slides, but it's really important at the beginning to agree the PMO objectives. If you're going to a senior manager and executive and saying, I think we need a PMO function, or even if they're coming to you and saying, hey, I'd like you to set a PMO function up for us, understand what it is they want. Why do they want this? Do they want this to better understand where the organization is in terms of its people, in terms of its money, in terms of the delivery? What's the objective they're trying to achieve? Do they want to save money? Do they want to grow? Do they want to get more work done? Do they want to do more work with less risk, or less issues, and actually deliver on time? I think a number at the moment would probably talk to you about wanting to be agile. And I think there's a very good conversation, probably a separate one to have about that, but just be very wary when people say that they want a PMO to be agile. I'm not saying that you can't be, but it's not necessarily always the PMO that needs to drive that. It definitely has to be brought in by stakeholders, by clients, by technology. And yes, the PMO will need to react to that, but it's not really the PMO that should be driving that. But that's a separate topic. But understand the objectives, make sure you understand which parts, as we talked about in the previous slide, of the PMO it is that you are looking to achieve. Define what success looks like. So if I go back to the case in 2010, success for that was to be able to have a monthly meeting with the CIO and all of the project leads with a one-page snapshot of each project on a monthly basis. That's what he wanted. We looked, and there was varying other things that we could see that needed doing. As I said, change reviews, RAID reviews, improving some of the systems, because we were having to go to 3 or 4 different systems at the time to pull the information. But you can overcomplicate things and then set yourself up for failure. Define what success is in very simple terms to start off with. Go for the quick wins, go for the communications about how you've achieved that success, and build from there. Don't try to build an entire PMO function front to back in the first month or the first even quarter. It's not going to be possible. Be realistic with what you actually can achieve. Define that, get sign off from your sponsor, from the CIO, the executive, and then try and achieve that and build from there. Getting the senior buy-in relates to that. So getting senior stakeholders to buy into what it is that you're trying to achieve, what your objectives are, giving you the authority to go out there and do that. Because in a lot of cases, you're going to need that senior backing to go and talk to some of these stakeholders and say, this is why we're doing it. But then identifying those stakeholders, understanding their needs, as I touched on at the beginning, making sure that they're invested in this. So if you're asking them to produce a report in a certain way that's not the way they've been doing it for the last 10 years, and it's always worked for them, you're going to need to use your negotiating and your communicating skills to influence them as to why they need to change. And that may be that by then putting it into this format, it's a reduction in time for them, because you can just extract the information from a particular system or from a particular input that they're already doing. They can use it to give to their clients. You can explain to them that their clients are now receiving all of the projects that they're overseeing in one format. Try and find what the benefits are to them and what their issues are. They may say that they've got some problems that they're looking at, that they're trying to address, that you can add into what you're trying to achieve. And it's a win-win, and they're then bought in and will be more supportive of helping you to achieve your goals. Define priorities, processes, and tools. So again, don't try and do everything at once. What are the priorities for the organization? Once you understand them, put the right processes in place. Don't try and put too many processes in place and tie people up in red tape. Make sure those processes are necessary. And where possible, I've always strived to make sure that they're as simple as possible. I think sometimes people try to overcomplicate things to maybe make themselves look more intelligent, or to make the PMO function look more professional. It's not always necessary. Sometimes simple really is, in terms of the tooling and the processes, the best way. It's quicker for people to action. It gets what you need. Don't overcomplicate, would be my advice. Once you've understood all of your objectives, you've got your buy-in, the stakeholders hopefully are as bought in as they're going to be, and you'll never please everyone. That's been my experience. You've defined your priorities, then you can look at creating your PMO organization. Do you need people to support you? Do you need a specialist to look at the financials, someone to look at the reporting? How many people do you feel you need? Depending on the scale and the size of your organization, it is possible. I started back in 2010 with my first PMO function, where it was just a one-man team. It was me. By the end, when I was doing this last year, there was a team of around 10 PMO analysts underneath me, covering probably about 300 project management or project managers. Roll out monthly routines. So I always found it really good to promote and make very transparent a calendar of our activities. One of the key things I always wanted was a website that people could go to within our organization, and they could see on any day what was required, what was expected, what was coming up. I think, again, part of winning over the stakeholders is trying to reduce the amount of fire drills or emergencies that they have. So going to them at 4 o'clock on a Thursday saying, I need your monthly status update tomorrow morning so that you can do what you need, or finding that you're going to get that really late, so you're having to work all weekend, putting their status into the required format. It's not beneficial to anyone. So being transparent, giving them enough time and lead time to give you what you need, and factoring that into your monthly routines. I found that worked really well. We got a much better engagement. Yes, there was always stragglers, the people that's going to be the ones that you're chasing. You learn over time and you manage them slightly differently, but having a clear routine of what you need and why you need, and building in lead time will really save you a lot of time in the long run. And then finally on here, providing regular metrics on your progress. I think one of the things I learned in the big organization that I worked in was that so much time was spent focusing on the negatives. If a project went wrong or it went red, everyone wanted to focus on it. No one wanted to look at the project that was green and delivered on time to budget, and the client was really happy. There was just a great, well done, move on. What's this red project doing? So I think making sure that the PMO spends equal time on the successes as well as the issues. You're going to have to spend time on resolving risks and issues and exceptions, but focusing on the successes, and importantly, focusing on the successes that you've been involved in, will loop back to the beginning there, agreeing what those PMO objectives were. How have you succeeded in those? What have you then built from there to go and be the phase 2 and the phase 3 to continue evolving the maturity of the PMO function is really important. So, don't be afraid to overdo it. I think one of the lessons I learned at the beginning was we was achieving an awful lot in terms of reporting time was down from, I think, originally 3 weeks it was taking people to put all the information, put it in. We got that down to a couple of days, but we didn't spend enough time shouting and screaming about the success of that. So therefore, it kind of just went unnoticed to people and a little bit unfairly. So I definitely make sure that you understand what your goals are. Once you've achieved them, communicate that. So I spoke for quite a bit there. Hopefully that all resonates with some of you or has helped some. I'm happy to pause there for questions.
Great, thank you, Sam. There were loads of questions that were generated from that. A lot of them sent to me privately, but I've shared in the open group. And Ian, who I'd like to introduce at this point, is supporting Sam, and he's been answering some of the questions in the chat as well. But Ian, do you want to just say a few words about yourself?
Hi all. Yeah, Ian Murphy, 20 plus years working in technology projects, mostly in financial services, and have seen many PMOs over the years. So I've dipped into a few of the questions there and tried to answer some. So hopefully I've given the same answers that Sam will give. So.
I'm sure you have, Ian. I'm sure you have.
But actually, difference of opinion is good anyway. But look, let's
sure.
good presentation, Sam. In that you covered loads of points, generated lots of questions, and your timing is good as well. So it leaves us about 30-35 minutes for the questions anyway, and discussion points. So I've got about 10 questions to ask you, but what I might do is ask 3 or 4 of them, open it up to discussion. And then, depending on what people are asking at that point, then go for the other questions that came in the chat. Okay. So, first question, if I may, for smaller organizations with less project deliverables in scope, is PMO a must, or can it be bypassed? And I know Ian's already put his view in the chat. So I'll just ask you, Sam, if I may. So for smaller organizations, do you still need a PMO, and what would it look like?
I think you do. I think that it's possible that the PMO could be part of the project management team in that case. So if you've got less project managers, less actual projects in flight, I still think you would find the scale of efficiency. So in my opinion, PMO is scalable. If you've got 3 projects, it's still important to have a consistent approach to the reporting. It's still all of the other risk reviews, change reviews need to be done in the same way. I think there's less probably risk of not having transparency into those projects because there's only 2 or 3 than there is when you've got a couple of hundred. But I think, again, it's a case of going through the varying aspects of what a PMO can cover and understanding, well, what do you want? I think a PMO organization or a PMO function would look very different to the one that I had when we had a huge amount of projects. But yeah, I think it still would have benefits. I think you would still get efficiencies from having some of those standards in place. Ian, do you agree?
Yeah, so as I was saying in the chat, I think the key thing for a small organization is that the sort of good practices of a PMO or a slim PMO are given to all the PMs, so that they're almost, they're self-regulating and applying that good standard. But a guide from a central PMO is the ideal, so.
Okay, let me move us on then. So, if there's someone wants to come back on that question, they can in a bit, but let me just cover a few more if I may. So another question came about one of your slides, Sam, and the question was, how is functional approach different from the strategical approach within the PMO scope? So if you want, you could go back to that slide if it might be helpful, but so how's it different, the functional and the strategical approach?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the functional, I've seen this in organizations. So in functional, the PMO function kind of sits to the side, let's say, and you're designing and setting the standards. So, for example, this is the template we want you all to fill in for your reporting. This is the time that we want that to be done. You're making sure that it's being performed by people. But the project managers in this case would, and the technical delivery leads, etc., would all report into a senior member of the organization. It wouldn't report into the PMO function, or it wouldn't sit within the PMO function. Equally, you're probably going to get dictated to. So in the company I work for, the tools that we would use were for the whole firm. I couldn't go off and say, I don't like using this tool, I want to go and use my own one. So in that case, they're what I describe as the functional aspects. You have some governance, you have some flexibility in what you can control and what you can do. In other organizations where maybe it's slightly smaller or it's more relaxed, you may also have the responsibility of designing what the processes are, what tools you can use, bring in, managing some of the project management. They may directly report into the PMO function or into the PMO himself. I've seen that as well. So that's why I divide those two out and say these lines on this slide will get blurred. Some aspects will go into one PMO function, others into another. But I say that's how I differentiate.
Okay. Thanks, Sam. And just one other great question, which again I think Ian responded to in the chat. But this one will be good to both get your views, Sam, and I'll also open it up after to see what the thoughts and experience of others are as well. And the question is, how do you quantify the savings gained by PMO? And therefore, how can you justify a PMO? What's the business case for it? How do you quantify it? What's your experience there, Sam? And I'll open it up to others too.
Sure. No, it's a very good question. And I think it's important if we go back to, let me just go back to my slides. Sorry, I've got one screen, so I'm trying to do it all on one here. So agreeing the PMO objectives. If the objective is that your company or your organization, and I had this in the last role, was trying to save money. We had an annual target to try and reduce our headcount budget, let's just say by 20%. The PMO function drove that. So I think when you're setting what those objectives are, try and be quantitative with those. How can you define those objectives in a numeric way? So is it that you want to reduce the headcount by 20% or the budget by 20%? And then show that the PMO function has done that. So by hiring 4 PMOs into your function, there will be a cost associated. But if you've helped and driven the reduction in a 20% budget, then you can quantify those two numbers against each other. I think I've answered the question there. Let me know if I haven't, and I'm happy to go further. But I think it's all about setting the objectives clearly, what the goals are, and understanding what your objectives are. Once you've got that, you can then show that, okay, there is a cost to hiring and bringing in a PMO function, but without it, you wouldn't have achieved these goals, and therefore that's how I would weigh the two up.
Other views from anyone else? Your experiences in terms of justifying a PMO and its value?
Yeah, so one of the things, I think it was Philippa who asked the question, there is a cost associated with it, but it brings consistency, it brings a higher level of quality in terms of reporting and approach. And one of the things I found with a PMO is that it clearly shows, and the cost, it may not be a simple case of, this is what it costs, this is what I got back, but often it can show projects that clearly need attention and that might have, just continued on without getting that attention, without the sort of consistency of delivery. And it's that focus on the projects ultimately that can have significant savings for an organization where they identify and start dealing with those projects earlier than they would have, So
I think also jumping back in on that, when we think about the savings, our natural reaction is to go to financial, but by capturing the metrics that you will through a good PMO function, the number of risks that you capture, the number of risks that you resolve, that prevent projects from going amber or red and remaining green because you've addressed them effectively, are all savings to an organisation. So yeah, we shouldn't get caught up in thinking about that as purely money.
Yeah, agree.
Views from others. Anyone else have experiences with this in terms of how you've justified a PMO or the savings you see, and it doesn't have to be just financial? Remember to unmute yourself if you do want to make a point. Otherwise, I will move us on.
I think sometimes it is quite obvious is that you do need a coordinating function, especially if you're in a large organization that's running multiple projects and programs. Multiple projects and programs. So the case for it is really about, as has been said, as Sam is saying, what are the objectives of the PMO? Yeah, so it is so obvious that you don't even have to build a case for it. It's self-evident.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Dave, you're cutting up a bit there for me, but thank you. I got most of it. Jerry, I think you wanted to say a few words. You've unmuted yourself.
Yeah. I mean, I've been doing this kind of stuff for a long time, and I remember pre-PMO days and the chaos that we had there. PMO is a naturally occurring governance function. All organizations want to know how their projects are progressing. And the more projects that you start to undertake as an organization, the more prevalent the advent of a PMO becomes, and the more of a requirement it becomes. So, you know, it's don't view it as should we, view it as a natural progression, because it's going to happen. You need to have oversight of where your spend is and where your problems are.
Yep. Agreed. Okay, let me move us on then to another question. So I've got another, 6 or 7 questions to cover. So with the first one being portfolio, program, and PMO. What's the difference? So some people have a portfolio office, a program office, or PMO. Your views there, Sam? Is it just terminology, or is there a difference?
I think it is an element of terminology. I think for me, the portfolio and the program get intertwined with each other, but obviously that's high up in an organization. What are we trying to achieve? What's the collective projects? If you work backwards, you've got your projects, you've got your tasks that you're giving out to people. That's getting work done, and the program / portfolio managers, directors would be making sure that the right projects are being selected to achieve the strategic goals of the organization. For me, the PMO sits across all of that. When people talk about PMO, is it program management office, project management office, portfolio management office? I think it's all of them, because I think to do a PMO properly, the key thing is to understand what the objectives are, what the goals are for that organization. What's the strategy? What are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to achieve a 20% reduction in budget, but a 20% increase in output? Do you want to make sure that your website is up and running and improved? Do you want to go into a new part of the business? Do you want to expand your business into a new country? What are the goals and the strategy for that department, for that organization? And then the program portfolio leads, they're responsible for making sure that the work is picked correctly, and the projects are done in the right order, in the right groupings, to be as efficient as possible. And the PMO can help with all of that. And the PMO needs to understand all of that to really work and govern properly. Otherwise, how do you know that what you're governing is the correct things to be governing? So I think the terminology gets a little confusing sometimes because it gets used by different people in different ways. But to me, your projects are doing the work. Portfolio program is kind of intertwined. PMO, it's the 3 Ps.
Okay, great. So the next question, thanks for that, Sam. So next question, I think it came out in 2 or 3 questions to me, but I'm going to combine as one. And again, once I've asked, if I can start with you first, Sam, and then Ian, and then I'll also open it up, okay? Because I think it's a great question, and it is. Let me just read it. Can you explain how to create a PMO organization? So let's just assume it's from scratch. So explain how to create a PMO organization, And are there any particular things to identify while doing this? And then in terms of recruiting for that organization, this person's question was that often PMOs have people with maybe graduate skills, less experienced. Why does that happen? Why are people with, perhaps less project management, program management skills fulfilling PMO functions rather than, say, seasoned project managers? So yeah, all about creating an organization and what's the right caliber of people and experience that you should have in there.
Okay, good questions. Let me just think slightly about how to answer those. So how would I set up a PMO function?
This feels like an interview now, right? So this feels like you have to nail this one to get the job, right? So how do you set up a PMO, and what's
Sam,
the right skill mix in there?
you had a slide in the appendix there where you went through the.
Yeah, I was just going to bring it up.
Good guys.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah. So I did, and I was just going to say, hopefully it's come across that there's no silver bullet to this. Anyone that tells you that here's a book, go and read it, this will help you set up any PMO function you ever want to set up, is probably lying to you. It's all, I'm going to keep going back to it. It's all about putting the hard work in, doing some digging, doing some investigation to understand what it is that you're trying to achieve and what you want that PMO function to be. However, having said that, I've always kind of gone through a bit of a phased process when I've done it, and Ian's right, I put that at the back of the slides just in case we needed it. So I won't go through this in huge amounts of detail, but if people want to set time up with me offline and through the mentoring function, I'm happy to go through it and talk to people about their specific needs. But phase one objectives, agree and document what those objectives are that we've been talking about. I can't second guess what it is for your organization, but that's what I would do. I'd want to go and speak to as many people as possible. Certainly do a lot more listening than talking, which is, from people that know me, not my strong skill, because I love to talk. But yeah, find out what people are having problems with, find out what they want, find out what the organization needs, what the strategy is, so you can define your objectives and get those documented. Communicate those, make sure that it's communicated in big organizations by someone senior that then gives you the authority to be seen as the PMO lead, that's backed to go out and do this, and you're doing this for a reason, not just because you want to go around and make everyone's life miserable and tell them they've got to change the way that they do their reporting, or that they've got to do twice as much reporting as they did before. There's a firm-wide organization reason for this. Identify your stakeholders. You've already done part of that during the objectives finding and going out and digging, but now really start to get a relationship with your stakeholders. Make sure they understand what you're doing and why you're doing it and the benefits that they get to it. Try and then tweak and amend that as much as possible to try and get some of the benefits to them involved into your objectives and your goals. Then look at your tools and processes, and define what you need, what's already in place. In some cases, it will be that there is PMO functions happening. In a lot of cases, they don't realize it's a PMO, and that's exactly what happened with me. Back in 2010, I was doing a role. I was working directly for what was probably classified as a program manager, doing a lot of work that they needed, addressing a lot of problems and issues that they had. And then someone said to me, "So why aren't you part of the PMO team?" I said, what's the PMO team? Had a couple of conversations with people that manage that team and realized that, yeah, I was doing everything that they did centrally, but this person I worked for didn't realize they existed. And cut a long story short, I ended up working for the PMO team and eventually managing it. But a lot of times these things are happening in organizations, but just not consistently and not in the most efficient ways. Everyone's kind of doing a bit of it themselves. So understand what's in place, understand what you need, define your tools and your processes, then build out your skill sets. And I'll come back to the question about what skills and what people do we need, and then put your calendar, your meetings, and promote your successes. So that's my kind of 6 phases. This will be in the materials that Aline will share afterwards, but yeah, happy for people to reach out to me to talk in a bit more detail about their specific needs.
Perfect.
Is that good? Yeah.
Yeah, no, perfect. Very comprehensive. And Ian, good shout out to show those slides actually. Yeah, and that answers the question fully, right?
Yeah, just on the other point about, I think there was a question about often there's junior or maybe graduates employed into a PMO. So often they'd be seen as PSOs or, program support officers and the like. And they're essentially being tasked with making sure the rigor takes place. So they don't necessarily have to have loads of years of experience. In fact, having less experience can often be an advantage to them, in that they're saying, I'm being tasked with getting this information on a monthly basis, and I'm really just following the policies and things like that. So in large organizations, project managers will often be dealing with PSOs who are essentially following the procedures. The PMs may have, there may not be a need to do that in their view, but the PSO is following the guidelines that the PMO has set out, and that's often the rationale for having more junior people within the PMO function.
Yeah, Ian, I'll add to that as well. So I thought I was going to be controversial saying it, but you've kind of said the same things there. But I agree. I didn't have a project management background. I think, and I say this to a lot of people, and I say this when I go in for interviews, I think all of us do have project management backgrounds. Most of what we do in our day-to-day life, if we're not project managers in our roles, most of what we do in our day-to-day life, whether it's moving house or organising a wedding, revamping your garden, whatever, it's a project. We don't realise that the majority of what we do is actually can be broken down into project management, and we've kind of developed those skills throughout many aspects, not just in our professional lives. But I agree with Ian. Most of the best PMOs that I've hired, trained, developed have come from non-project management backgrounds. A number have come through the service management background, the same as myself, or actually I've taken from admin stroke PA functions, because there's a lot of coordination, definitely a strong communication skills needed. You need to be able to work with many different stakeholders up and down the organization. And you kind of tend to find that those people have got those skill sets. They've probably run large scale incident calls with various different stakeholders. Executive admins, PAs are constantly dealing with a variety of different people. If you can give them the framework, which we do through the tools and the processes, and the project managers then have to explain things into layman's simple terms, it benefits everyone. Because sometimes project managers can be really complicated, talking about projects in words that not everyone understands. And having people that aren't from the same background and with the same experience that ask more prompting, probing questions actually helps everyone. So I actually think that some of the best PMOs that I've hired and are still doing PMO roles have come from non-project management backgrounds. And I think, just finishing up on that, project managers prefer the accountability, and the adulation stroke, responsibility of delivering, and people that go into PMO prefer more the governance and the fact that they're overseeing, they have responsibility of making sure that everything's done, but they're not the ultimate responsibility for the success or failure of a project.
Right. So some more questions coming in, I see, but so we have about 15 minutes, just under 15 minutes now to go, and we still have about 5 questions. So some of them I'll try and group up where I can, so forgive me for that, but let's see if we can get all the questions covered. So next set of questions, which again I'll group, tally in nicely with what we were just discussing, and that's someone who wants to get into being a PMO, get into project management, I guess, PMO, and but they don't have any PMO certifications yet. So which ones would you recommend? And then from another person, they've actually gone ahead and they have a degree and they've done the Prince 2 certificate. So Prince 2 might be one that someone might want to do, but they can't get a role. Any advice as to how someone gets their foot into a PMO function? So certifications and how do you get the job? It doesn't have to be Sam. Sam, let me just give this to Ian, let me give that to Ian, please, and others. Ian, do you have a view, certifications for the PMO, and how you get your job?
For PMO specifically, you know, as Sam was saying, sort of a good communication skills. I'm not overly familiar with specific sort of certification that will enable you for PMO. You know, good communication skills, good organizational makeup. You know, they're all part and parcel of working within the PMO. I suppose the project management, you know, you're relying on your project managers doing their jobs and doing that piece effectively. So yeah, I don't have much to add on that front. Yeah.
Just adding in a little bit, I'll just very briefly. So my background, as I said, was not traditional. I didn't train. I didn't do project management. I came from service management. I honestly think you've got to have strong communication skills and be a very adept problem solver. Those two things, you'll see issues that are happening and you'll want to jump in and fix them, and that will kind of evolve into you developing a PMO process or moving into a PMO function. The one thing I did do though, and Ellen knows I'm redoing this at the moment, and I'll be going off to join that again shortly, is Prince 2, because I did feel that even though I didn't have a project management background and that people were explaining things in simple terms, I kind of wanted to have a good understanding of what an industry standard was, whether that was, you know, going and doing PMP or Prince 2. And at the time, I decided on Prince 2. And I found that useful, not so much in that it taught me how to be a PMO, but it just gave me, I guess, a better understanding of a process, of terminology, and I felt more able to talk with project managers with some form of confidence, authority, using words that they understood. So I would recommend people to do that. I don't think it's a necessity, and I don't think it's a showstopper to you getting a role, but I would recommend people looking at those kind of courses to just give them more confidence and more understanding of terminologies, processes, functions.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and I'd agree with that certification and what you said there, Sam. And I'll just add one bit that may help some people, you know, where I've seen experience of people getting into PMO, project management, etc. That may be useful. And that's if you're in an organization already, then looking to shadow existing project managers, PMO, so asking for secondments, etc. So going in, just gaining experience while you're shadowing and learning. If you are not in a role at all, but you want to get into project management, PMO, then one possible option is volunteering. So I know that a lot of not-for-profit organizations, charities, will happily take on volunteers in the spaces of IT, project management, etc. as well. So that might be a good way to get yourself into that arena if you don't have any experience and are not currently working. Okay, let me move us on.
Hi, Adam. Sorry.
Hi.
I just couldn't resist, you know,
an opportunity
to promote our next, session at 1:30. Yeah,
okay.
We're going to be able to tell people you can actually get best practice certification on the P3O route. Project
Perfect.
programs or portfolio office. Sorry, couldn't resist it. So,
yes, and I didn't see that you were there,
please,
and I'm glad you said that.
If you haven't registered for the one at 1:30, we can tell you how you could actually get some qualifications in that area.
Yeah,
sorry, I couldn't resist it.
No, perfect. I'm glad you mentioned that. And that's 1:30 p.m. UK time. So in a few hours, in 3 hours, for those of you who are from other countries. But yeah, thank you, Victor. That's absolutely right. So that session is about transitioning from whatever you're doing into project management. So yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you for that. Let me move us on. Tools to help PMOs manage and report on the portfolio. You briefly touched on this in one of your slides, but any specifics, Sam or anyone else, any specific tools that you use apart from Excel, perhaps, Word, anything that you use to manage or report on the PMO?
Yeah, so in the organisation I worked for, so it was a big American organisation, so we didn't get a lot of choice over the tools, but they were initially take tools in and then change them, tweak them to suit their own needs. Towards the end of my career there, they were just buying things off the shelf. So very familiar with Workday, PPM. Those kind of tools work, especially it's a one-stop shop. You've got a format, you have to provide the same information, fields are mandatory. It's a great place to have to capture everything about the project, and for everyone to be able to dip in and dip out. I would just say that sometimes with those tools, they can be very rigid, and it then causes issues. That if the project's not particularly mature or big enough, and those fields are mandatory, how do you fill them in? And over time, they get very confused. So I've seen them used well, but equally I've seen some issues where I guess my accounting background, I just like to pull data out, put it into Excel, pivot it, and do what I want to do with it. But yeah, tools isn't my strong point. PPM and Workday were the two that we use the most, but the majority I'd pull out into Excel.
Okay, thank you. And that's helpful. And I'll just add there then, so for people who are maybe not in large organizations and are doing this, small organizations, 50 people, 100 people, I've seen tools like Trello being used. So very dynamic, free. And there's obviously others like Evernote can be used, and some of these tools are more modern and for small organizations. So one other question that I'll ask now, and this person wants it absolutely answered. They've asked me to raise this a few times now, so I can't forget them, otherwise they'd obviously not be pleased with me. And it's to do with Center of Excellence. And sometimes a PMO is called the Center of Excellence. Or what's your view of what Center of Excellence means and how that relates to a PMO? And so is it Center of Excellence or Project Management Center of Excellence, or is it PMO? And what's the difference, if any? And let's go to Ian with this one, if he has experience there. And we can even open it up to see what other people's experiences are.
Well, I think PMO by its nature would be seen as a center of excellence. If a company is getting fresh into it, they may well have to either they have the skills and they're not utilizing them, or they need to go out to the market maybe and have maybe some consultancy to formulate the PMO. But it's important that it is seen as that center of excellence, and that it's not just dabbling in an area. So if either it has strong skills to create it and put it in place, or what I've seen is consultancy engagements where they've gone out, put the structure of the PMO in place, very solid structure, very robust, and then that becomes the standard going forward. But it's key that the PMO isn't seen as a try this out shop, I would have said, so.
Okay, I hope that answers the question. I just need to move us on purely for time. We have about 4 or 5 minutes left, and there's still a few questions to cover. Someone's just mentioning while we're answering this, can you kindly put the slide up with the phase 1, 2, and 3 up? So they just want to see those phases. So we can do that while I ask this question. So the question is, when we have Agile, Scrum concepts involving projects, why do we need a PMO? So great question. I think it came up in one of the other sessions yesterday or the day before as well. So is a PMO still relevant when you're doing Agile?
100%, because the PMO is looking at a lot of things. So if you think about Agile and Scrum, it's all to make sure that the delivery meets the expectations at the beginning. So at the beginning of a project, you've approved a project to build a car. And at the end of it, there's a quality control check to make sure that that car has been built to the right specification, is in the right color, whatever. So your Scrum meetings and your Agile concepts are to make sure that you don't just come to the car at the end of the car and go, it's supposed to be blue, this is black. You hopefully, by going through and following the Agile methods, you develop that car with the client, in close proximity, and you've gone through that journey together. there's still a need to have a PMO function, because the PMO is governing that that's being done in the right way, that you're reporting, that you're capturing your risks and issues, that you're addressing those, that you've set your tolerances. That's not what Agile sets out to do. So yes, there's definitely a need to have a PMO function in an Agile world. As I said at the beginning, it's just nobody's really put anything together at the moment that says, how do you PMO in an Agile world? And I think that's where people are struggling at the moment. I think PMO is very rigid, governing, you must do this, you must do that, here's why. There's a little bit of leeway, but not so much. Agile's kind of trying to be a bit more, we're going on a journey, let's see where we go. And the two are struggling to meet sometimes in organizations, but there's definitely a need for it.
And I think I don't have too much exposure to it myself yet, but I'll just mention it in case anyone's interested. I think Safe Agile, so from the one which is capital S, capital A, capital F, small e, Safe Agile is trying to address this from top down. So it's still Agile, but whereas the other Agile methodologies such as Agile PM or Prince 2 Agile just focus on the project management aspect, Safe Agile, as I understand it, focuses on the whole top down, from all the way to the top seniors to the juniors and middle, and the governance around it. So one for some people to look at perhaps after this session ends. So look, we're nearly out of time, still a few questions, but I'll just ask one more if I may, and then we'll wrap it up. Sorry if I don't get to your question. Let's see. You mentioned quick wins earlier in one of the slides. Can you give examples of quick wins that people should be looking for in a PMO that they could, essentially do? What quick wins did you apply?
Good question. And again, it's really specific to what you're trying to achieve in that. But from my experience, the quick win would have been putting the template together. So if you look at the example I gave about the reporting, the CIO came in, I want this meeting, I want all of this information. I was in a meeting with him, came out of a list of like 20 bullets of all of the different pieces of information he wanted. Don't commit to, yes, we'll have that meeting tomorrow. Come back with, a quick win of, okay, let me knock up a template, prototype, get it to you tomorrow morning. He's then happy. He then thinks, oh, Sam's great. He's achieved what I've asked him to do already. We're on the right trajectory here. The PMO functions then something that he sees in a positive light. Picking another quick win to go from there of, okay, we'll then get that populated with 3 or 4 projects. Again, look, don't commit to doing everything at once. Pick and choose those quick wins so that you're making momentum, you're gathering that momentum through the journey.
Great, thanks. So look, great questions, great session. Thank you to Sam in particular and Ian for supporting, and others that contributed. Thank you for all of your questions. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, so I need to end it there. But yeah, thank you.